The failure of the confessional poem. The late 20th century presented the most current philosophical attempts to understand both the self, society, our place in it, and so on, have been what I will call deflationary rhetoric. In its decline, Rome was metastasized by Christian governmentality, made easy by the efficiency of the Roman Empire. By 313 AD, the Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, which accepted Christianity. 10 years later, it had become the official religion of the Roman Empire. At the end of 476, Rome collapsed from its political tumors. In 1453, Constantinople finally fell to the Ottoman Empire with a difference of 977 years. The cancer of pastoral power continued through the Roman Church and its dormancy of the Dark Ages and the Norman Visigothic shuffles. The upside of the Renaissance and the Westphalian sovereignty peace of 1648 reflected an accommodation to reality, not a moral, ethical, or aesthetic insight. Relied on a system of independent states refraining from interference in each other's domestic affairs and checking each other's ambitions through a general equilibrium of power. No single claim to truth or universal rule had prevailed in Europe. As progeny of Western exceptionalism, we revel in the anti-intellectualism of our culture and our fear of the learned, separating the work of the intellectual and the work of ordinary people. At the end of the 60s, LSD tabs and the remnant weed roaches, we abandoned the revolutionary structures and turned to the individual. There were no easy privileged roads to grand narratives for utopias and radical alternatives beyond the hard work of political advancement delivered through parties, trade unions, bureaucracy, and politics. The statist fascists argue we had now to look inwards. Change would be reframed as a struggle against oneself, against our inner enemy. One had to confront the inner fascist. In the 80s, the critical race truth emerged from a group of legal scholars trying to answer a very simple question. Why, after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 created formal legal equality between racial groups, racial inequality persisted? We are the largest jailers in the world. Black Americans are incarcerated at greater rates than whites. As of 2018, blacks represented 12% of population and 33% prison population. Conversely, whites represented 63% general population, only 30% prison population. As individuals, we became the root cause of the structural ills that today we offer under critical race truth, as imperialism, racism, white supremacism, exceptionalism, Menonism, all under the force of law. The mechanics lack intentionality. Structural racist laws do not have racial subordination as their purpose or design. They rely on Marcusean banality. The practices that sustain racial inequality are not spectacular. They are daily, prosaic, mundane, ordinary. Finally, race neutrality laws and procedures reproduce racial hierarchies without mentioning race at all. The confessional poem, circa 1950s, has been described as poetry of the personal or the I, focusing on extreme individual experience, the psyche, personal trauma, taboo matters, mental illness, sexuality, and suicide. The adherents of the confessional poem, Lowell, Plath, Berryman, Sexton, and Ginsberg et al. These confessional poets worked in opposition to the idealization of domesticity, revealing unhappiness in society. At the core of confessional politics and confessional poetry is the psychological deflationary effect to threshold the collective or individual ego as performed in the booth or the ballot box. The confessional fails when it is performed in the street, in art galleries and workplaces, on behalf of corporations and on social media. Recall the June 9, 2020 viral photo of senior Democrat leaders in Wisconsin Chuck Schumer kneeling on the floor with Gandhi Kante silk stoles after the police murder of George Floyd and the subsequent passing of the Justice and Policing Bill. The Tertullian Publicitio Sui, of which Church Father Tertullian called it, publishing themselves, which did not change the law, something they had the power to do. The politics of self-care produces a confessional culture in which the battles and the struggles playing out within have to be discussed, confessed, and shared with those outside. The individual confessional fails the therapeutic sensibility of thresholding. Instead, they reinforce the overblown ego, which continues consciously raising self-examination, turning into endlessly representing lack of intentionality, banality, and race-neutral structural social questions as personal ones. Busying ourselves with loud penitent rituals, announcing our inner battles and performative humiliations will not deliver the promise of cleansing purity.